Hi, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar on becoming a sensory smart parent. We will be teaching you how to effectively develop sensory diet and use sensory strategies to help your child who has sensory needs. My name is Kathleen Yap. I am a pediatric occupational therapist and nutrition and wellness coach for children with autism, ADHD, and sensory processing disorder. In this webinar, I promise to show you who this webinar is for and who would benefit from these sensory strategies, steps to developing an individualized sensory home program, strategies to improve arousal state using sensory strategies, and strategies to implement into your daily routine. So first, let's talk a little bit about who this webinar is for. So parents of children with autism, sensory processing disorder, ADHD, and feeding difficulties, and really any child that's having any kind of sensory issue, difficulty maintaining focus, tolerating transitions and changes to their routine, as well as children who are demonstrating sensory seeking or sensory avoiding behaviors, as well as other professionals that are working with children with sensory needs that are trying to find various sensory activities that are going to help improve their child's focus and attention. So first, let me tell you a little bit about who I am. I am a pediatric occupational therapist and wellness coach for children with autism, ADHD, and sensory processing disorder. I have been working with children with sensory needs for over 18 years, and I'm also the owner and therapy director of a pediatric home-based therapy clinic where we are implementing these sensory diet activities on a regular basis. I'm also the parent of a child with sensory needs, so I've been able to implement firsthand many of these sensory activities with my own child. So here's my disclaimer. The information in this training is provided as a public service and is for informational and educational purposes only. This information should not be construed as medical advice. Please remember that each child's medical, sensory, and emotional needs are different, and therefore I have to recommend that you consult with a licensed healthcare professional, such as an occupational therapist, before starting any sensory home program. And please keep in mind that although every effort is made to ensure that this material is accurate and up to date, it is provided at the convenience of the user and it should not be considered definitive. Things are always changing. And please keep in mind that strategies need to be individualized for each child and results are going to vary. Improvements in behavior are not guaranteed and they are not going to happen overnight. So now let's talk about the steps on how to develop a sensory home program. So the first step is to identify what exactly are sensory behaviors. So all children and adults have sensory needs. Some have more than others. A child with sensory needs will demonstrate either sensory seeking or sensory avoiding behaviors. And some children are going to fluctuate in these extremes. So kids who are sensory seeking, examples of this is the child who is undersensitive to stimulation and they might be seeking very intense sensations in order to get organized or stay organized. So this might be the child who wants to touch everything when you go to the store, or the child that's in constant motion, or the child that just can't seem to sit still. The sensory avoiding child is the child who seems tactily defensive. And these are the kids that seem to get upset when there's too much noise, or when there's the tag on the back of their shirt that's bothering them, or it itches, or they have to have socks without seams. They avoid messy play, or they become upset when things are out of place, or when their hands are dirty. Most kids actually fluctuate in both of these extremes. So a child might seem sensory seeking for body awareness, movement, and touch, but when provided with the right balance of this, it can actually help the child to stay focused and on task. Noise, some smells, and lots of visual stimulation can cause sensory defensive behaviors. When there's a lot of verbal instructions or too much writing to visually attend to, or too many directions, or just too much noise in general, or just too much going on in the environment, a child might start to become overstimulated. And then as a result, the child might start demonstrating more sensory seeking behaviors in order to stay focused or to be able to handle the sensory input or just to prevent shutdown. So the next step is to understand what alert state means. So let's talk about what self-regulation is. Self-regulation has been defined as the ability to attain, change, or maintain an appropriate level of alertness for a task or situation. In other words, self-regulation refers to a person's ability to adjust their attention, the level of attention required to complete a particular activity within a particular context. This is going to vary depending on the task demands. And you need to have the ability to increase or decrease your activity level based on the context of an activity and how hard it is, as well as what the demands are going on in the environment around you. If you have a low state of alertness, you're going to see some behavior that's lethargic or droopy or sleepy and just very slow moving. When this happens, you're not able to pay attention or learn completely or complete tasks. Versus a high state of alertness, you're going to see hyperactive behavior, activity that's just too high in constant motion, just not able to sit still. You're not able to stay focused on task, and this can also make learning difficult as well as task completion difficult as well. So the next step that helps in developing an effective sensory home program is to be able to identify the different alert states and identifying where your child's at in alert state. I like the alert program as one program that really is a nice way to help children to be able to identify what their level of self-regulation is. It uses a engine chart or an engine analogy to help children to be able to relate and help them to understand where their self-regulation is. It uses the concept of their engine being too high, too low, or just right. And they use examples of such as Winnie the Pooh, Tigger, and Eeyore. So Winnie the Pooh is somebody that his behaviors, he's easygoing, he's able to sit down and complete an activity. He might talk a little bit, but for the most part, he's able to do an activity, hold a conversation, and get things done. So he would be considered just right. Versus Eeyore is somebody that is very slow moving. He might be kind of sad or depressed almost, but it's like pulling teeth trying to get Eeyore to get up and get moving and to do something. And so that would be an example of a child's alert state being too low. And Tigger is on the other end of the spectrum, being too high. Tigger's bouncing off the walls. He can't sit still. His thought processes are going from one to the next. He's boing, 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 boing. So when I talk to kids, when I'm trying to explain something like this, like Tigger can't have a conversation with you because he can't sit still long enough. He's not able to sit still to follow directions. Eeyore is not able to follow through with an activity because he is moving too slow. Winnie the Pooh is able to do an activity and is able to complete it. So this is a really good analogy for kids because they're able to identify with those characters if they know who they are, and it helps them to be able to, tell their parents then, this, I feel like Eeyore right now. And so then the parents then able to help with choosing appropriate sensory activities to help with regulating them or bringing them up or bringing them down depending on what the needs are. So identifying these sensory seeking and sensory avoiding behaviors helps the child and the caregiver to identify that also the triggers that are going to help, that might cause the child to become overstimulated or shut down. These triggers identifying the triggers help the child to stay in the just right category. If you know what the triggers are, you might be able to give some sensory strategies to be able to keep them just right so that they don't ever get up to be Tigger, or if they don't fall apart to where Eeyore is. Becoming more aware of the child's sensory seeking or sensory avoiding behaviors are also going to help you to identify as they're becoming more regulated or less regulated. And so you're able to adjust and modify the activities that you're working on based on that. And the Tigger, Eeyore, and Winnie the Pooh is just one example. Some other examples are, it might be an example of a snail, a cheetah, and a rabbit. So where you have a rabbit that is he's moving right along, where you have a snail that's moving along at a very, very slow pace, and then you have like a cheetah that is going super, super fast. It's just, you want to try to find an activity, or I should say characters that the child's able to relate to, depending on their age as well, but just something that they're able to identify themselves with, because a big part of identifying alert state is not just you as the parent or caregiver understanding what their alert state is, but helping the child to be able to understand it. And that way they're able to, find some different activities that are going to help them to be able to bring their attention level up or down, depending on the task demands. So the next step is identifying when a child is becoming overstimulated or is starting to demonstrate shutdown, or in other words, the engine is too high or too low. So some signs of overstimulation or the engine being too high might be fidgeting. The child might start moving one or multiple body parts constantly. They might start touching everything. They might lose their ability to sit still or to keep their hands to themselves. They might start touching the person next to them and getting into their personal space. They might start fidgeting in their chair. They might start moving, half sitting, half standing on the chair, unable to stay seated with their feet on the floor, or unable to sit still to the point that it's starting to distract others. Talking is another sign. You might start to notice increased talking. The talking becomes louder and more excited. The child starts talking louder and over the people that are in the room. In the classroom setting, you might see that the child is getting louder and starts talking over the teacher and the other students. The talking also becomes faster and incessant, and it might be tangential, and it might be repetitive. They might just start talking about random things. Noises are another thing. A child might start making noise for noise sake. They might just start making noises with their mouth. They might start making noises with their hand or feet. They might start tapping things. They might start popping their mouth or their lips or their tongue. The noises seem to might actually start to make the child get more and more excited, and then they start to get more louder, and then that just causes more behaviors that you're seeing. Movement is another thing that you might start to see. The child might begin to run or spin or start to seek excessive thrill-seeking movements. The child might seek out dangerous thrill-seeking behaviors, such as jumping dangerously, body crashing, or throwing large objects or even themselves unsafely. Vision, that this is a very subtle one that I tell parents that it's really important to see, because most children are going to demonstrate this. The child is going to start to lose eye contact. They are going to start to divert their gaze. They might not be able to look at you when you're trying to talk to them. They're either looking away, or they're looking at the ceiling, or they're looking past you. The child might also get overwhelmed with too much visual stimulation. When there's too much visual stuff going on, they might not be able to find something, or they might just get really overwhelmed. Another example of a child's engine starting to get too high might be taking a look at what their overall behavior interactions are. Are they laughing at inappropriate times? Are they yelling or becoming aggressive in their language and interaction? Are they covering their ears in response to sounds? Are they becoming overly rough when playing with others and not seeming to notice? It might not be intentional at all. They might just seem like they're being too rough when they're playing with somebody else. They might start to throw things. They might start to throw themselves. Another example is that the child might just suddenly start to become very clumsy and unsafe and just falling over things and tripping over things. Oral is another thing that you might start to see. The child might begin to chew on things. They might start to chew on their fingers, the shirt, hands, toys, pencils. They might start putting things that just don't belong in their mouth into their mouth. They might start to grind their teeth. They might also, and I said this earlier with the noises, but they might start to make loud noises with their mouth, such as the tongue clicks, raspberry spitting, whistling. So these are just some examples of when a child's starting to get a little overstimulated or starting to increase that engine to too high. Some signs of shutdown or engine being too low are a little bit different. You might start to see some shutdown behaviors such as withdrawing from others. The child might start to run away from you or hide under a table or into another room. They might run away from you completely in a parking lot or in a store when there's a lot of stimulation going on, or they might just start crying to the point that they're not able to calm themselves down. You might see some avoidance behaviors. They might avoid the activity altogether. They might avoid you. They might avoid eye contact. They might avoid listening. They might just seem like they're not paying attention to you whatsoever. You want to take a look at their movement. Is the movement very slow and labored? Does it seem like the child doesn't have any strength or becomes weak, or it doesn't seem like they're using their muscles or have any strength when they're using their muscles at all? Take a look at what their vision and language looks like. Are they avoiding eye contact? Does it seem that they can't answer questions or stay focused before zoning out again? Are you asking the same question over and over again before you're able to get an answer? And are they just kind of zoning off when they're trying to answer you at all, and they start to answer you and then just kind of trail off? And are they zoning out altogether? Are they not able to attend to follow directions? Does it appear that they're not listening? Does it seem like they're paying attention to what they're doing, such as watching TV, but they're not able to transition from it? Or they might be playing their video games and they're very focused on it, but then they're not able to get past that point. And that has to do with the fact of that TV and the video games, they make you shut out the rest of the world. So it might seem that they're very focused, but at the same time they're kind of shutting down the rest of their senses. And signs of just right are the activities that you're presenting to your child. They're able to sit down, they're able to follow directions, they're able to, for the most part, sit still, they're able to complete the task. You're not really seeing any kind of behaviors. You're having good eye contact, appropriate language, they're able to engage in a conversation with you. So not necessarily calm. Just right doesn't mean that they're necessarily calm, because kids are going to be excited and you're going to see fluctuating levels of behavior. But what you want to see is, are they really able to complete an activity that you're asking them to do? Are they able to function without needing a whole lot of support from you? So the next step that we're going to talk about are potential triggers that may cause your child to either shut down or become overexcited. And it's important to identify what these triggers are, because if you're able to identify the triggers, then you're able to kind of pair them with some sensory strategies that we're going to talk a little bit later that might help to prevent the child from either shutting down or becoming overexcited. So the first thing you want to do is take a look at, what are the task demands? How hard is the activity that you're asking them to do? And how many instructions are involved? Are there multiple steps that the child has to be able to follow? Are there a lot of verbal instructions that the child has to follow? Because sometimes the verbal instructions, when they're not paired with something visual, it might make it a little bit harder for the child to stay on task and to be able to complete the activity. Are there too many sensory inputs that they need to process? So is there a lot of visual information going on? Are there a lot of background noises and verbal directions that the child has to be able to process? Are there other people making noises in the background, or just doing things that are just visually distracting? Are the activities too challenging or frustrating? When you're learning something new, that makes it a lot harder for you to stay in a just right state. It's going to be really easy for a child to be able to shut down or become too excited if the activity is too challenging, especially when you're doing an activity that requires a lot of motor planning or a lot of concentration or a lot of coordination. The child's going to need to concentrate a lot harder, and it's going to be a lot easier for them to get frustrated, and that frustration is usually going to manifest in either a shutdown or becoming overexcited. Okay, so now once you know where your child's engine is, then you can choose activities to help them to either calm down or wake up. Keep in mind that many of these activities can be used both for calming or alerting, depending on your child and depending on the speed or the intensity of the activity that you're performing. And these are just some examples that I found in my practice that can be easily integrated into your routine. There are tons of other activities, but I can't talk about all of them here, so I just wanted to highlight some of the ones that we tend to use a little bit more in my family as well as in my therapy practice. So the first one is proprioception, which is also stimulation to the, otherwise known as stimulation to the joints. This is very calming and is organizing for most kids. And some examples of this might be deep pressure or downward pressure to the shoulders or the head, or if they're sitting on your lap, you can give some downward pressure onto their knees. You can give some big hugs and big squeezes. Jumping and stomping is another good one that I tend to have kids do. When you're doing that, you want to make sure that they are getting their heels in contact with the floor. A lot of our kids tend to jump up on their toes, which actually ends up getting them more and more excited versus helping them to, calm down or wake up. So getting that heel down is really good to get that, that nice proprioception into, all their joints. Some other examples of proprioception are animal walks or jumping jacks or wall push-ups, as well as some, anything else where you're just really trying to get some stimulation to those joints. Breathing is another really good activity. You want to work on just taking some slow, deep breaths. If you think about it, if you're getting yourself really worked up over something, you're going to be breathing really, really fast, and your voice is going to get more rapid in your talking, and you're going to get louder, and just start with those short, rapid breaths, which is actually going to make you get more excited. So just really helping to teach kids to monitor their own breathing. And so some easy ways to do this might be to pretend to blow out birthday candles. You can have them scoop their hands together, bring their hands, nice and close, tell them to take a deep breath. Basically, you want to take a deep breath, hold for 3, blow out for 3, and then start again. So I tell kids to, take their deep breath, hold it, make a wish, and then blow out their birthday candles. And kids can relate to that and they can understand that. Other examples might be to blow a pinwheel, or to blow, the dandelions, the wispies we call them. But the focus is really on taking deep breath in, holding for a few seconds, and then blowing out very slowly. You want to avoid that. That's not gonna, calm anybody down. So you want to just really just kind of kind of the activities that they teach you to do in yoga. And then another thing that I try to do is to teach kids to, very slow, soft talking helps to prevent the escalating of behavior. So kids, when they're getting excited, they're breathing really rapid, and they might be like, and so what we try to do is I might whisper like this, and then just really try to mimic to them that they need to talk slowly and softly. And by lowering your voice to a whisper and getting everybody to imitate it, it's going to help them to bring their arousal level down. Heavy work's another example, and this kind of goes along with proprioception, but I wanted to separate it out for just to make it a little bit easier to explain, different activities. But heavy work is basically movement breaks incorporating some different types of like push-pull or heavy loading activities. So that might be carrying something really heavy. It might be, picking up canned goods and putting them away. It might be stacking chairs or pushing some heavy furniture. It might be pushing a vacuum. It might be putting something heavy, in their backpack and letting them, carrying it around the house, or when you're going outside the house. But basically just, anything that's, a lot of push or pull, which it's requiring some resistance on their part. Oral, motor, and smell is another example. So oral motor activities, oral proprioception activities are good for organization. We already talked about the deep breathing, that kind of goes in that, but also sucking. Sucking hard candy can be very calming and organizing, or just sucking in general. That's why babies like to suck their thumb. They like to suck pacifiers because sucking can be very calming and organizing. So you could do it with a candy lollipop. You can do it from drinking from a water bottle straw. Especially those Camelback straws are really good because it provides, they have to suck a lot harder. So that's something that you can do with that. Sucking something thick, sucking something thick like applesauce up from a straw, or yogurt up from a straw, or even a milkshake might help with providing that oral proprioception as well. And you got to think about it. This is why people smoke. This is why people chew on pens. This is why people bite their fingernails, because oral proprioception as an adult can be very calming. So it's no different for children. We just have to find those appropriate activities for them. So chewing, you can chew on gum, hard candy, hard pretzels, crunchy snacks, ice. We also sometimes use this chew tubes. I buy TheraTubing and I'll tie it up and let kids chew on that, because that provides some nice oral input for them to bite into. They have chew necklaces and jewelry that also helps with providing some oral proprioception as well. Smell is something else to think about, because there has been a lot of research that certain scents and smells have positive changes in brain activity to both calm, organize, and help with focus. And so different things that you can use might be essential oils. And with regards to that, make sure that you're using, only good quality essential oils, because other cheap ones have added chemicals to them. And especially with regards to children, you want to be really careful about the adulterated oils and making sure that they're chemical free. And so the brands that we use are only organic oils that are steam distilled. That we use the Young Living brand, because that after doing my research, that worked best for my family, and I knew exactly where they were coming from. So you just want to be really careful. And if you are smelling certain things, you want to make sure that it's just very pure. Other things that you could do would just be smelling various spices, or smelling flowers outside. Any of those things are really good for just helping with both calming and alerting as well. Movement is another great activity to help with organization. If you think about it, that's why kids might be, sometimes when they're upset, they might rock, or why they might, start to spin themselves in circles. However, those activities might not necessarily be the most organizing for them. Sometimes kids tend to seek what feels good to them, but what feels good is not always what their body needs. And so just taking some movement breaks while you're carrying something. I like the movement sit cushions are something nice to help with movement while they're sitting in a chair and fidgeting and doing homework or different things like that, because it's going to provide some nice little postural adjustments, and it's going to help reduce the amount of fidgeting, because you're just making that they don't need to move a whole lot to get that same feedback. Other ideas for movement might be going out in a swing, or rocking chair, or if you have a small child, you can kind of wrap them up in a little sheet and kind of swing them around. If you have a rocking horse, that's another good rocking activity. If you have a yoga ball, you can bounce on the ball, you can rock on the ball. Riding on a scooter board or a bicycle, all those are movement activities that can also help with both alerting and or either alerting or decreasing alert state. And touch is a nice, another really calming, organizing activity. When a child becomes too high or too low, they might start touching everything to either help them to stay focused, or because they're too excited, or just because it's comforting. More structured tactile activities might decrease the need to feel like they need to touch everything. So they might not always be attending to their bodies, so they might squeeze extra hard on something, or they might have a whole lot of extra pressure when writing, for example, or they might not seem like they have as much control over their muscles, so then when they're going to pour something or pick up something, they're overshooting because they're just really not paying enough attention to their body. So doing some different tactile activities might help with that. So some examples might be lotion, applying lotion and massaging, because touch can be very calming and soothing and organizing. I like squeeze balls or stress balls or other little fidgets. Those little koosh balls are great, because they really help the brain to stay focused, and it helps, just by squeezing it and moving around, it just feels really good. I like, the little Mardi Gras beads and rubbing them inside of your hand. That's another really good tactile activity. Kids, they like things that are really soft, and so just having a soft blanket or a soft stuffed animal or even a scarf that has some fringe that sometimes can be something that's nice and calming. For your smaller kids, for the infant swaddling is a nice tactile activity, because it's just going to help provide that nice deep pressure. You can also play with other just sensory activities such as finger paints or foamy things such as shaving cream or whipped cream. That's a really good tactile to really stimulate the tactile system, and that really helps to, it can be very overstimulating for some kids, but for those kids that are really low arousal or the kids that are, seeking a whole lot of tactile touching things, that is going to provide them some nice stimulation as well. Playing in a sandbox or just playing with sand or dirt, that's another really good, sensory activity just to help provide the body with some different tactile sensations that the body might be seeking. Vibration is something else to think about, because vibration really gets deep to stimulate those tactile receptors. So they make vibrating pens, they make vibrating balls, vibrating pillows, vibrating stuffed animals, and even a vibrating toothbrush. But just doing some vibration sometimes can be both calming or alerting, depending on what your child's needs are. Visual activities are some other things to think about. If you have younger children, that's why babies like mobiles in the crib. Lava lamps are great, because if you have a lava lamp, in a child's room, just by watching that movement up and down, that can be very, soft and smoothing. They make the little batons that, I don't know what they're called, but when you turn the baton, all the glitter and everything goes up to the top, and then you turn it again, and then it just goes back down to the bottom. Those are some really nice things to help, calm, and can help kids to, visually focus, and they can shut out all the extra visual stimulation that's going on around them. TV is a visual activity, and I know a lot of times parents will use a TV as a visual distraction, but you have to be careful with TV, because for some kids it does cause them to shut down too much, and then it makes it harder for them to come back up. So that's something to just kind of keep in mind as far as for visual activities. Having a safe place or a safe spot, like as a tent or a closet or just a room where there's not a whole lot of visual stimulation, helps for some children, because it helps them to shut out all the different visual stimulation that's all around them. And so just having a room set up, even having a place behind two couches or a table where they can kind of crawl into, where they can kind of shut out some of the visual stimulation, might help for a child to be able to regroup. Looking at pictures or books can also be very calming. It just helps to give them something to look at, and it a lot of times will help bring their mind down if they are feeling a little overstimulated. Fish tanks are awesome as well. I don't know if you've ever seen that's why they have fish tanks in doctors' offices, because just watching the fish swim and move all around has a very soothing effect as well. And listening or auditory input, so listening to classical music or white noise machines, or having the dryer going in the background, or just having some calm music. All those are different activities that might help with both keeping focus or filtering out a lot of the external information that's out there. There is something called the therapeutic listening program that some therapists use that helps to increase modulation, and it helps stimulate the auditory processing system. But that's just one of the different programs that are out there that stimulates the auditory system. You can also work on whistles. That tends to be a little bit exciting, but if you're excitatory, so if your child's really low arousal, using something that loud whistles or whistling or humming or singing, those are definitely some activities that might tend to bring their arousal level up. However, those might not be activities that you want to pick for trying to bring an arousal level down. Okay, so now let's talk about how to put this all together. So what you really want to do is to help to empower your child to be able to figure out what's going on with them. We want to teach them how to know whether their engine's too high or too low, and then they can start to choose the sensory activities that they need to be able to help them to pay attention more. Once they're able to start choosing those activities on their own, that's going to help them to be able to self-regulate. So in the beginning, they might not really know what they need to do to be able to calm themselves down. But once you provide them with the different sensory strategies, you might find that when they're upset, they're coming to you and asking you for a hug. Or they might start, if they're an older child, they might start doing those activities on their own. But you should start to see that your child's able to, maintain, focus and stay calmer for longer periods of time, because they're able to use the sensory information more efficiently, and they're not getting overexcited or upset or too overwhelmed or shutting down. They're able to process the sensory information more efficiently, and so that's going to help their overall performance. And so then what you need to do is you need to start making those sensory activities part of their daily routine. So it might be first thing in the morning, if mornings are hard, that you pick those sensory activities that you do every day. And so it might be that, if your child doesn't want to get up in the morning, that you have to go and you get a yoga ball and you roll it on top of them in the morning. Or you might need to go in and just do some really hard back pats to try to get them up and going. Or it might be that when they first come down in the morning, that they need to do some jumping to help them to, get their morning going. Or they might do fine in the morning, but they start to fall apart as the afternoon goes. So it might be that when you guys are doing homework, that you need to do some different movement breaks. But you're going to want to start to do these sensory activities daily as part of their routine. And so your child's going to get used to knowing that this is what I do, and when I start to feel this way, these are the activities that help me to stay focused. And you'd be amazed that children that are 3 years old are able to follow these alert programs and understand these sensory activities. And because children, they don't really know, like, that when I'm feeling frustrated, I need deep pressure, but they know that when they're frustrated, that they need to come over to mom and they need to get a hug, and they want mom to squeeze her or him so hard, because that's what feels better. And that's something I should have mentioned earlier, as far as for some deep pressure. With some of these different sensory activities, you're probably going to need to vary the intensity for it. A child, when you're giving them a hug, if your child is low arousal level, they're probably not going to register that hug the same way that you and I might be. So, or especially if they pull away. I have a lot of parents that tell me, like, oh, my child doesn't like hugs. If they're avoiding some of those sensory activities, it means that they need that sensory input even more. And so what I want you to think about doing is to give a hug that's really, really hard. Harder than you would probably normally give them, but not so hard that you're going to hurt them, but a little bit firmer, because they're not registering it. And so they need these sensory activities. They need it to be more intense so that they're able to register it, because their registration is low. And that's why you see some of the sensory activities that they're seeking are going to be pretty intense, because they need that level of intensity in order to make sense, in order for the brain to register it. Okay, and so now we're going to talk about a couple of tools that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. And the first one is the engine chart. And so I'm going to give you a couple of examples of some of the different engine charts that I've used with some of our clients. The first one is the Winnie the Pooh chart, and you can see we have Eeyore, who is too low, Winnie the Pooh, who is just right, and Tigger, who is too high. And what I tend to do is I will laminate these, and then let the child, I'll laminate like another picture that I'll have Velcro on, and I'll put a Velcro strip at the bottom where the line is, and I'll let the child move their little piece or picture to wherever they feel like they are at on the line. And so if they're feeling too low, they'll move their little person, and then we'll do some sensory activities, and then I'll ask him again, how is your engine? And to see if he was able to move up to Winnie the Pooh. And the same thing, if they're up at Tigger, we'll do some sensory activities and see after the activities then if the child feels more like just right. And so this is a really easy concept for most children to get if they're able to communicate with you, because most kids know who Winnie the Pooh is, they know who Tigger is, and they know who Eeyore is. And so this is just one example of one of the ones that I use sometimes in therapy. So for some of the older kids, boys especially, they like cars, and so they might understand a little bit more if you use an analogy of a car. And so we have a picture of a slow car, or a car who's looking kind of sick. You have a car that's nice and happy and smiling, that's moving right along at a normal speed, and then you have a race car. And again, this is another analogy that children can relate to, where when you're asking them how's your engine, they're able to identify where their engine, if it's too fast, too slow, or just right. Some more examples. We have a turtle, too slow, the OK symbol for just right, and a person moving really fast for their engine being too fast. And I like to use this sometimes with older kids where, Winnie the Pooh is a little bit too childish for them, and so is the car example, so some of the older kids tend to relate to this a little bit better. And so here's another example that I made of a picture of a little boy who's sad, and the little boy that's giving a thumbs up for just right, and a little boy that's angry for being too fast. But you can see that you can really be very creative with your pictures and kind of make it be whatever is going to work with your child. So we're going to talk about some other tools. These are some examples of some different sensory fidgets. Hand fidgets, stress balls, koosh balls. There's little slinkies in there. Pretty much anything that you can move around in your hands that you're going to get that nice tactile feedback are examples of fidgets. And so these are a nice little thing to have on hand as well to help with some self-regulation. Another tool that might be helpful is to have flexible seating options. So we have a picture of a move and sit cushion, which it's a positioning wedge that has little bumps on the one side and it's smooth on the other side, and it helps to promote upright sitting posture as well as it's wobbly, and so it allows for little postural adjustments when kids are sitting. They also have a flat one, a flat disc that you can use as well, and therapy balls or yoga balls are also really good as far as for seating options to help with position changes and just making those very small postural adjustments to help kids feel like they're moving without actually having to get up and get out of the chair and get distracted and then having to sit back and regroup to the activity you're working on. And so now I just wanted to go back and review with you some of the different activities that we talked about that might be helpful to assist with self-regulation. So first, we're going to talk about some proprioceptive activities. And we talked about joint compressions, jumping, running, skipping, making sure that the heels are down, that the child's not running on their toes, lifting, carrying or pushing or pulling heavy objects such as the chairs in the kitchen. Sometimes we'll put heavy books in the backpack. Vacuuming is another really good activity to help with self-regulation, using a weighted blanket or a weighted vest or a weighted lap pad. Wheelbarrow walking, roughhousing, wall push-ups, squeezing stress balls, leapfrog, and tug of war. Now we're going to review the touch and deep pressure activities that we talked about, such as playing with various fidgets or other tactile toys, playing with soft toys such as stuffed animals, messy play activities, petting pets or other animals, mixing cookie dough with your hands or kneading other type of dough, rolling up in a burrito blanket. That's another activity where I have the children lay down in a blanket, I'll roll them up, and then I'll get a big therapy ball and I'll roll it on top of them. Kids love it. They think that they're a sandwich or a burrito. Squishes, where you're rolling the yoga ball pillows or chair cushions on top of them. Swaddling, if you have a baby that's younger, or just wearing a pressure vest, something that's basically making them feel like they're getting a big bear hug from you all the time. Massaging, rubbing in lotion or just a general massage in general. Therapy brushing program. Various textures of things to touch. Warm bath and water play. And those big bear hugs where you're just squeezing and just holding very tight. It feels really good to a lot of our kids. And now we're going to talk about our vestibular activities or our movement activities, such as bouncing on a ball, rolling on a ball, riding bikes, riding scooter boards or skateboards, amusement park rides, hanging upside down, jumping on trampoline, swinging, rocking, running, spinning, dancing, and swimming. These are all really good activities that, any type of movement, and they stimulate the inner ear to help stimulate the vestibular system. And so now we're going to review our oral motor activities. Examples of this are the deep breathing, especially focusing on breathing in for 3, holding for 3, and exhaling for 3, and ways that we talked about where I like to have kids, pretend that they're blowing out a birthday candle. Blowing bubbles is another good activity to help work on some oral motor, blowing bubbles, whistles, anything where they're really focusing on exhaling and breathing out. Sucking lollipops, candy, water bottles from a straw, especially those Camelback straws where they're really thick and they have to suck really hard. Sucking thick liquids such as milkshakes or smoothies up through a straw, and thick foods such as applesauce or yogurt up from a straw. Strong flavored foods such as salty foods, spicy foods, and sour foods. And then chewing gum, hard candy, crunchy snacks, or ice. All these are going to provide some type of oral proprioception to help with calming and organizing or alerting, depending on what your child needs. And so we're just going to review a little bit about how smell can also have a calming effect. And so when you smell something, the aroma is sent directly to the center of the brain in the limbic system, where that smell is then processed, and it releases certain chemicals in the brain that can be either relaxing, stimulating, or have a calming effect depending on what the need is and what the smell that you were breathing at that time. And so I listed just a couple of essential oils that tend to have a calming effect or an alerting effect depending on what your child's sensory needs are. And some of those include vetiver, frankincense, citrus fresh, lavender, peace and calming, sandalwood, cedarwood, and ylang ylang. Okay, and so I feel like I need to mention a little bit about the signs of sensory overload. And so, you want to really be careful with the different sensory activities, because especially if you have a child that has a very sensitive sensory system, you might get a little overstimulated. They might get overstimulated. And so some things to just kind of look for: increased distractibility, any kind of shutdown behaviors or withdrawal, nausea, flushed skin, sudden tiredness, or really any other kind of changes in behavior. You want to be really careful if your child does have any kind of movement sensitivities. I like to give parents the example of, if you, as an adult, when you go on a roller coaster, after you get off that roller coaster, you might feel nauseous, or you might feel dizzy afterwards, or you might feel a little bit wobbly. And so that is actually a sign of you being in sensory overload, because the vestibular system is one of the more sensitive systems. It can have the most calming effect, and it can last the longest. And so, but because many of our kids can't tolerate that, so that's why the vestibular system, you want to be very careful when you are engaging a child. And it's different if they're directing it, but you want to be sure that if you're engaging them in the activity, that they're not becoming too overstimulated by that. So if you have more questions, or if you want more information, or if you feel like you need a little bit more help, feel free to go to www.kathleenyap.com/heal. We are offering 30-minute free consults. If you feel that your child is needing more help than what you might be getting, or if you haven't made much progress in your therapy sessions, or you want a second opinion, feel free to sign up for a free consult, and we can see what it is that we might be able to do to help you. We do offer private therapy sessions or online therapy. And so if that's something that you think that you might be interested in, if you have more questions, feel free to contact us at the website above. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed today's training. Thanks.